So glad everybody's here tonight to hear Michael talk on the food forest and the biotic pump. We are Soil Smart, Soil Wise. We're a nonprofit. So far, we're a totally volunteer organization. It would be wonderful if you'd help us change that. Our purpose is to really help cool the planet, which in our view is part of the prime directive. And the prime directive in our world is the statement that all life creates the conditions that support life, which is true of everything but humanity. So the biotic pump is how nature naturally cools the planet. And this is something that we can do something about. So it's soil health, which means compost and biochar and additives if needed, and land design to keep the water we get, and then planting plants like using the Miyawaki forest method to make sure that evapotranspiration happens. So I think Michael will talk more about that, and certainly I can talk more about that. If you're interested, please let me know. I want to make sure, or I guess let me ask you a question. Everybody who is registered tonight, you got a link. If you keep that link, you can come back into this space at any time and watch the video. If, however, you want to join us and become a member, then you can watch this video and all of the other videos we've had for free. So just a little FYI there. It's another way to support us and a way to get a big bang for the buck if you'd like to do that. So I would love to introduce Michael here. And I think most of you know him. I think that's why you're here, but I'm going to put this in because some people would be watching the video and might not know him. And he's certainly a person worth knowing. He is a farmer and a wildcrafter and educator. And he has worked with over 1,000 plant species. He founded the Friends of the Tree Society in 1978. He has 35 years of experience in permaculture. He's taught 34 design courses worldwide, and he promotes sustainable wildcrafting as a tool for earth repair and local resilience. I want to note that Michael's been involved in what he called earth repair for quite some time, which tells you that he's had the wisdom to see the problems coming that we all are experiencing now, and has been dedicated for many years in making a difference in that. And so, Michael, I thank you for that. His work integrates ethnobotany, agroforestry, and traditional land stewardship to restore ecosystems and increase natural abundance. And that's a key because we are naturally abundant. That's the beauty. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. We are naturally abundant. So, Michael, I am going to stop screen sharing. And it is your turn. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Well, thank you, Catherine. And Catherine and I are on a lot of the same calls as Carl Welty. Actually, all three of us are on the bi-regional bandwagon, the wildfires and water systems. Now, and we're working on putting on a Spokane permaculture. Along with Mary Bishop, who's here, we're putting on a Spokane permaculture summit in August, and probably maybe nobody else here is from the Spokane area, but if you were, you could certainly join us. Now, so today my topic is food forests and the biotic pump. So I'm going to tackle the food forest first. And I'm going to look at the big picture first. I'm a big picture kind of guy, and I will just make some remarks before we go to any particular look at screen sharing here. So the role of food forests, food forest and agroforestry are very similar. Food forests are basically trees, forests that have a lot of food in them, obviously. But agroforestry, you might call it a branch of agroforestry, which is basically trees and combined with agricultural production. And so I'm mainly talking about agroforestry today, but I'll try to keep the food forest prominent. Now, I also put together things called medicinal forest. And so you cannot have a food forest that doesn't have medicines in it, because many foods and food plants have medicine value, like hawthorn, elderberries. It's a long list. And then there's also fertilizer forest and fiber forest and dye forest, and there's all these different kinds of agroforestry systems can have many products as well as food. And so a good permaculture principle is how many different products and how many different functions can you get out of one planting, out of one piece of land, one parcel. And so I just was at my local farm here. I have a 1/4 acre. And well, actually, we're up to almost a 1/2 acre at the site, but there's a core area that I've had for 7 years. That's a 1/4 acre. We have 100 crops growing on it, and we gross $50,000 a year on a 1/4 acre, which is pretty good. So that's a really big part of our income. And so I like putting in systems that are ecological, beautiful, and also are productive in terms of producing things that humans can use, and of course that nature itself and the birds. We have a pollinator hedgerows. For instance, all of our plantings are really rich in pollinator habitat because we have a really diverse group of plants, and they're blooming at different times. And we focus mainly on perennials. A food forest, of course, is going to be mainly perennials, but can include annuals. We always have some annuals in our system. And so there's good production from year to year, and there's a lot of habitat. It gets more and more a food forest over time becomes more biodiverse. It has deeper roots over time. It gets taller over time. The amount of relationships within the system goes up over time. So there's diversity of function, diversity of species, biodiversity in general. So the role of food forestry and agroforestry in the world is that it can actually be a big chunk of the solutions the world needs to cool the climate. So Catherine talks about cooling the climate being the prime directive. The more greenery in the world, the cooler the world gets. Every plant is an air conditioner. It's an air humidifier, and it cools the planet. And I don't want to go into the whole science of that during this talk, really, though I'll refer to it maybe a bit more. But so if we took 1/3 of all the world's cultivated farmland, which is bare part of the year, or most of the year even, but at least part of the year, those bare lands have heat island effects. And so what we're doing when we put in a food forest is that we are reducing heat island effect, especially if we're doing it in an urban area, for instance, or if we're doing it on degraded lands, or if we're doing it on annual croplands. As we're getting more leaf cover, and we're going to start cooling the climate. And so we need agroforestry on a big chunk of the world's lands, agricultural area. And food forest is a way that the individual can plant just a bit of that. I mean, we need, I think it's something like 2 billion hectares of more tree cover on the planet, something along those lines. But you can contribute some of that, even as small bits in your yard. So everybody can plant trees and get more leaves in the world. Figure out how you can do that and do your contribution. And if you're doing a food forest, you're also providing food. So right now, as we all know, urban areas are what we might call food sinks rather than food producers. We bring in food from all around the world to feed our cities today, and with a lot of fuel involved. And so if we have local food forests, we can get more and more of our own food. And we'll probably better get to some pictures here in a bit. So at any rate, food forests can fix the climate of the world, agroforestry, food forests, and we can also cool the world. So it's, in a sense, food forests are not just some frivolous thing. that a few suburban mom and pops are doing in their backyard. It's actually part of a very large movement that could really help save the world and save humanity. And so um, food forests are much bigger than they used to be. Well, actually, what I could say, um, I'll say that remark for a little bit later. Let's see here. I and see, I covered. So I like the concept, and they have this in Switzerland. I used to live with a Swiss woman for a while, and I learned a bit about Switzerland. She says that there are trails that start in the downtowns of Switzerland and go out through the city and into the countryside and up into the mountains. And you can get on a trail in the heart of the city, and you can go, keep going and going and going. And uh, ideally, along those trails are planted berries and fruits, and it has little benches and places for picnics so that people can get on the trails and there's food right there and they can have just, and it's especially people with children. It's really wonderful. For adults like little snacks along the trail too, but it's so precious for children to be able to munch their way through the countryside. And so, in a sense, we could call these trail networks linear food forests. And so that's just one of the, and so we need those. And when I was a kid myself, I was a kid a long time back, uh, and and when I was growing up, there was our town had alleys. We had a small town, rural, sort of a small town, and we had alleys, rural alleys that cars would occasionally drive on. But there was a lot of fruit trees, plums, apples,
Yeah.
pears. People planted had a lot of times fruit trees that were hanging over the alleys and were fair game for all the kids in the neighborhood. So that's we could have. That's the kind of world we want. That there's food hanging off the bushes and in the parks and in the cities and on the trails so that everybody can have fruit. That's part of the goal of the food forestry of the future. Now I think maybe I'll start my screen sharing here and let's see here, how do I do this share? So I actually need to go to my background. I'm going to close out a few things here for a minute, folks, here while I try to get to my PowerPoint. And because right now I need to be able to, actually, it may be up already. Here it is, actually, never mind. So, and now I'm going to do view by slide show. And this is a slideshow.
No, we got to hit the green button down below.
I didn't hit the button yet. Okay, let me how do I get to the green button again? Sorry, I hit.
Yeah, it's hard
There
when
we
you
go.
do
I
the
hit
PowerPoint.
escape, and then I go
Yeah.
back to the post attendees Zoom, and then I have to get back to Zoom. Do I click on? Sorry, I like I'm not the
So
best.
hit the share button and then you should be able to find
I
the screen with
know,
the
but
power.
I'm looking for how to get to this. Maybe if I click the Zoom here, there we go. Now I am in the Zoom room, but I
Should
don't.
be a green button at the bottom
I
or
know I hit that earlier, and I thought that did it, but there's another button after that.
There's another window that pops up that's got the selector for the with kind of your
yeah,
screen.
you have to pick the screen.
Another window. I don't know where that other window is. Darn. Let's see. I'm in Zoom Workplace, and I'm trying to get back to that where I can see the share.
Yeah, you want to get back to where you can see us.
Okay, I'm going to close that. I'm going to see maybe if I close that, maybe there. Well, there's my. I'm sorry, but I was having a hard time. Usually, I can get back to the Zoom room, but it's just not. I'm stuck in team chat, maybe team. I'm thinking I'm stuck in team chat. How do I go out of here? Do I actually?
Maybe hover over the Zoom icon at the bottom of in your
I
dock.
know I did. I clicked on it, and that usually brings it up, and it's not this.
If you hover over it, it might give you both windows, and you have to close out of the. It sounds like the screen share window is popped under the Zoom window and it's sort of hiding itself and
Okay,
it's not
well,
letting me
if
properly back.
necessary, I'll have to come back, but I'm going to close this particular window here and go back. Eh,
Now, it's awkward in PowerPoint because when you do large screen in PowerPoint, it blocks everything. You
I
can't see
know, but
other things at
now I
all.
can't. It's not blocking anymore, but I can't get back to. Maybe if I click on this. There we go. Now I'm back. I'm going to hit share again. I'm going
Now
to
you have
hit
to hit the arrow
share again.
and then you'll see your computer and now you got to find your PowerPoint.
Well, I
On
got to
that.
hit that share. I think you are screen sharing.
Yep.
Okay, now we can see your screen. Now you go back to
Okay.
PowerPoint.
Are you
There
now?
you go.
Okay.
Yep,
Now I'm going to go to slideshow. Okay. Are we there now?
perfect.
It
Yeah.
says Tillis
Okay.
agroforestry.
Okay. And so this is a slideshow that wasn't made specifically for this class. So it's going to be a little bit wider ranging. But I just want to show this graphic quickly because I'm putting on a global earth repair conference or convergence in September. And it's all about this water paradigm shift, a new era for climate recovery. And I'm just going to whiz through that. If we keep rainwater on the land, and you put in all these water retention measures and you invest $5 trillion that make 100 million new jobs, you tie up all this carbon, you increase crop production $300 billion a year, you reduce natural disasters bills by $500 billion a year, and you do aquifer recharge around the world, and you reduce the heat in the world. And as a result of all that, holding more water on the land, the sea levels decline. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. If we green up the land and hold more water on the land and refill the aquifers, that's a lot of water. And we can decline the sea levels. And so we have declining sea levels, we have less bad storms, we have a much more food, and we have a greener earth. So this diagram here by Michal Kravchik is excellent work here. So you can go to his website. I highly recommend him. He's in Slovakia. Water Paradigm, Michal Kravchik. I think that's one of the best, most hopeful things I can give you folks. So a tree is an ecosystem, or is part of an ecosystem, and it includes the insects, the microorganisms, its fungal associates, the birds that come by, and on and on and on. It's a huge web of life, even just one tree. And of course, each forest or each food forest becomes a very complex ecosystem. And here's a few, these are our food forest, we could call them. This is more the agroforestry big picture, but you can see apple trees with sheep under them. You can see cork oak trees on this one on the upper left with pigs under them. So in other words, you can have your food forest can also include animals. They're not just and in fact, I would say that you cannot have a ecosystem or a food forest without animals, even though they may be wild. You don't necessarily need chickens or sheep or pigs, etc. But there's always going to be birds and insects and hopefully small mammals, etc. And there's so many different types of agroforestry systems, and I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm going to stick to mostly the food forest. So some of these I'm going to go over relatively quickly because they're not as germane to our topic. So let me now take a peek at my timing here and see where we're at, because we're really just getting rolling, and it's we're already at 23 minutes. So I'm going to, like windbreaks are really good, and windbreaks can include food species. Here's actually a hedgerow windbreak of elder flowers. And I mentioned elderberries and elder flowers are both crops. We grow a lot of them. It's really good for the flus. People, but it was sales really went up during COVID or during cold season. But at any rate, elderberries is a good thing to put in your system. Here's Mark Shepard's farm forestry. He has chestnuts and apples and grapes and all kinds of berry crops, etc. In his system. He's in Wisconsin. And we have riparian forest buffers, which most of us know about now. Riparian forest buffers that cool the stream, provide more salmon habitat, or at least fish habitat. And those can have a lot of useful plants, and those could be linear food forests as well. And so that's, I'm just kind of stretching the concept here. Cows and trees, not so much. Here's another thing you might want to look up. If you're interested in food forestry, look up in syntropic agroforestry or syntropic agriculture. It was developed in Brazil, but it's now being tested in other parts of the world. So here's people doing syntropic in Europe, temperate climates. So you can do some research and find this information. Then this is some of the guys' original plantings in Brazil. Actually, no, these are follow-up ones, but it was developed in Brazil. It's a lot of tree crops in the system, but not only tree crops. This will be early system establishment. There's a lot of trees and shrubs in there, but this is like probably a year or two after establishment. And as things grow up, what Ernest Gauch, who invented this system, does is he keeps cutting back trees and shrubs and things and piling the leaves up along the ground to provide ground cover. So he's growing the biomass that then mulches the system and helps feed the soil. And another thing you could look up is analog forestry, and I don't see it. It's currently not showing on this screen for some reason, but analog forestry was developed in Sri Lanka. And it's another form of food forestry that mimics natural forest ecosystems, but combines all kinds of crops for the small farmer. So his system is made for small peasant farmers, is who it's aimed at in what we call the two-thirds world. The South, the global South, but it can also be adapted to here. So analog forestry. And there's different levels of canopy cover and understory, and this is a horrible slide, but you could maybe just get a glance at it. And I'm going to recommend chestnuts as one of the crops that we grow in our temperate agroforestry systems because it's a grain crop. It can replace grain. We're used to eating wheat flour, and there's chestnut flour is also a starch food. And so I would think that we need to increase chestnut production in the world by a magnitude of about 100, for instance. And so any of you that can contribute to that chestnut explosion, there's Chinese, Japanese, Korean, European, and American. And it's a long thing to go into, so but suffice it to say that the American have been almost eliminated by the diseases brought in from outside the U.S., but the Chinese are the most resistant. So there's a lot of crossing these days, but you want to have at least Chinese blood in your genetics. And there's a form of agroforestry which can be applied to food forests is coppice agroforestry, coppice systems. And that's where you cut down the tree and it regrows. And we do that with our elderberries, for instance, to keep them within reach. We cut our elderberries on a 3-year rotation. We cut them down to a stump. They grow and fruit and flower in the first year. They get bigger in the second year. They get even bigger in the third year. And then we cut them down again. And so we're always getting these fresh, keeping it closer to the ground, and you get keep a lot of vigor in the system. Some trees coppice better than others. Some, if you just keep coppicing them too often, they'll lose vigor and might die. But a lot of trees really like frequent coppicing. Willows, for instance, and there's a lot of them. A lot of fruit trees will coppice. So at any rate, that's just, it also gives you wood products, so something else to look into. And you can make wicker basketry and furniture. And a key thing to think about in food forestry is your understory. Most people just think of the overstory. Okay, we're going to have apples and figs and pears And but what's going to be in the ground story? The shadier and the heavier the canopy, the less things you can grow in the understory. This is a relatively good canopy cover here, and this is golden seal here in this understory. So this person's, this is a cash crop here. The overstory may or may not be food, probably actually not in this case, but you can have an overstory of fruit and you can have understory of herbs, flowers. It's hard to get. Most vegetables really need a lot of sun. A lot of berries need a lot of sun, but there's berries and vines and crops that can take various degrees of shade. And so learning what you can grow in your shade is really is one of the key things that you want to be learning. And the way to learn that is to visit other food forests, watch videos, YouTube's online, and research ground story and understory crops in the literature. There's a lot of literature on this now. And actually, I was going to recommend a certain number of books, and but what I think I'll do is just email you that list. I'll send it to Catherine, and she can forward it on, because I don't think I'll have time to get to it here to explain the best books too much. Let's see here. Did I actually make I made a list of a few books here, so maybe in a little bit I'll give a few of those. Okay. So here's one book about learning to grow in understories, and this is Farming the Woods, Ken Mudge, Steve Gabriel. It's relatively recent. So it's a permaculture approach to growing food and medicinals in temperate forests. So this is a high-class book, folks, if you really want to do research. Some of you may not want to dig into it this much, but it's a good one. A word for Carl in Ojai, California. And if you're in California, or if you were in India or anywhere near the equator, or Florida, where you have a really hot, sunny, or really hot, dry, especially a climate that's sunny a lot of crops will grow better in some shade than they will in the full sun. In other words, so if you're in that kind of a situation, your understory, the species you'd use would be quite a bit different than the temperate zone, of course, but it's a lot easier to get high production when you're in a really hot, sunny, equatorial kind of position. In some parts of the world, they have a hard time growing crops unless they do agroforestry or food forest. They have to provide some shade because it's brutal out there. If you're in the Sahel Desert of next to the Sahara, and it's 120 degrees in the shade or in the sun, or the soil surface might be at 140 degrees, boy, you're really limited unless you get a overstory. So I'll do this. In our temperate zone, understory crops could also be mushrooms. And so mushrooms are a food and also medicine. So we can also incorporate medicinal crops. And this is a few shots here. Let's see here. I was going to go, I'm just checking in with my timing here, just a second here with Catherine. I believe that.
Yeah, don't worry about the timing. I'll keep that for you. So
okay, an hour for the food forest, a half hour for Biotic. No, or is it 40 minutes for the food forest and 20 minutes for the Biotic pump, and then a half hour for questions and answers? Or do we have?
Yeah, we'd kind of like to leave time for questions and answers. Yes.
Right. So it's an hour and a half or 2 hours our time frame.
Well, it's technically an hour and a half, but we can go as long as we'd like.
Okay.
So,
But
yeah.
okay, just so okay, that's good to know. So I'll keep going for a bit longer on this. So here's a picture of me in front of one of my medicinal forests. It's a medicinal food forest. It has medicines, and mostly medicines, but it also has food production. And this is a 25-year-old food forest in eastern Washington, near the Canadian border, in a zone 5 growing season, zone 4, zone 5 cusp area. There's a lot of cottonwoods in my system as a tallest overstory. You see I have some conifers in it, and I have a really great understories. I have this is 25 years old, and it was abandoned for quite some time. At one period of time, I sold it to somebody, and then it eventually ended up getting abandoned, and then I got it back. So I'm in the 50th year of doing restoration. But in the meantime, in all that abandonment phase, The garden did what it wanted to do. Now that is true permaculture. If you can design a system that you can abandon after a time and it keeps functioning and keeps growing and keeps getting more biodiverse and stays productive, that's really that's sort of like the holy grail of permaculture, where you establish a system that you end up being a wildcrafter in. You're not. I jest a little bit here, but this is what the indigenous peoples of the world did. They had food forests that go back thousands of years. They were very popular in Java and Southeast Asia. There were specimens in China. Most of the Amazon, it is now known, was actually one vast food forest that was tended by the native civilizations there that were wiped out by the early Spanish diseases. So and so they've been doing a lot of research around the world on these indigenous and traditional agroforestry systems. They had apple walnut forests in Russia. They go on and on. A lot of North America was a food forest managed by the Native Americans. At any rate, so but their understory was pretty wild, and they were what was called a horticultural society. Then the California Indians were a horticultural society. They managed their environment, they tended plants, they moved them around, and they gardened the environment and made it really rich in food, but that was also ecologically sound and was still a fully functioning native ecosystem at the same time. So, of course, now we can mix native and non-native. So we have a bigger, more to our palate, so to speak. But at any rate, here I am. I have a lily of the valley in here and bleeding heart. I have maple, mayapple, all kinds of understory herbs. Here's one with mostly black cohosh, which is a great medicinal plant understory. Here's this is in the fall coloration, but you can see I have overstory, and then there's a shrub layer, and then there's an understory, and then there's a really good ground cover as well. So it's a really good multiple story system. Though I don't have many vines, so I could be faulted on that. Not enough vines in my permaculture system. A lot of mushrooms. We have snags and dead trees now, and so we have a lot of forest litter, forest floor, leaf matter. So we actually have a functioning system it is a forest, and it's functioning like a natural forest, but it has productivity. This is in a more recent example of one of my systems. This is in an earlier phase. The canopy isn't so thick, and I have blessed thistle growing along with borage, growing along with betony, growing along with elderberry on the right-hand side. And so there's, like 6 different crop plants in this one little tiny patch of ground in the system here. Here's another tree I highly recommend for food forest, even though it's not a food actually. But it's a linden tree. Actually, it is a food because you can eat linden leaves. Linden leaves are a food salad, or it's a green, and the leaves are but the flowers are a medicinal, high caliber medicinal for calming people down under stressful situations. And so, folks, we have stressful situations now, and they're going to get worse, I predict. And so you should have linden trees growing in your yard so you can get a little relaxation from the flowers. And
they smell so great.
Yeah, and they're wonderful fragrance. Yeah. I'll get a little rash here. I always say that if I wanted to have a great place to have an outdoor bed, if you had a partner, would be under a linden tree in flower, because it's very, I think I would say it's erotic, the scent of it. Okay, here what I've done. I have a lot of linden trees in my agroforestry system, and so and it's hard work picking the flowers one at a time. So I've been cutting various limbs off of the trees, and I strip the flowers, leaves, and all, and I sell that as my product. So it's a form of pollarding. I'm not cutting at ground level, which is coppicing. I'm cutting up in the airways, and that's pollarding. And then I harvest the pollarded the foliage. another thing I do is grow cramp bark. Cramp bark is Viburnum tribolobum. It's a medicinal bark, cramp bark. You can tell that mostly women would use it. And I'm cutting up here various pieces of the stem here for a product, cramp bark product. And the berries are edible, though they need a lot of sweetening. They are really tangy. It's a wild fruit. So somebody, maybe Catherine or someone will remind me. I just did a slideshow, a webinar on native fruits of the Pacific Northwest. I can send you that link because it will give you a lot more information on native fruits, at least for the Northwest. Here's juniper trees, and those are juniper berries. Juniper berries are medicinal. They're very good anti-parasitic. They're good for the kidneys in the right amounts, and they're on. You might say they were used a little bit. It's hard to call it a food. It's a medicine, but you can eat a number of the berries, and they're a really good breath freshener, and they're going to be really a health food. So a little bit of juniper in the system, maybe. Here's an area in between two of my food forest on the one side, or medicinal forest, and then there's another one on the other side, and I kept one area open to grow crops. So this is early in this. This is part of my restoration. I'm putting in new crops, and here's a little bit later phase of it. A really nice, robust cover now. Okay. And 6:11. So I'm going to just, I think I'm just going to, I'm just going to go through a number of slides, quick look for some low-hanging fruit here. This is my pollinator hedgerow just going in. And here's established some years later. Here's even some years later. So this is a long pollinator hedgerow. So it's a linear, it's hard to call it a food forest. Maybe you could call it a food pollinator hedge. Lots of ground cover here. There's a big linden tree on the end. It was quite a bit. This is a few years ago. And anyway, I'm sorry. Here's the Beacon. I'm just going to go to this. This is the last thing. Beacon Food Forest is in Seattle. It was designed by these permaculturists. It's one of the most famous food forests in North America at this point. I think it's maybe 10 years old or something like that now. But it was designed by these permaculture friends of mine, and it's just an excellent example of a food forest and a community. It's a community food forest. They have a lot of garden plots there. Anybody can come and go whiz through it and learn from it, and grab some fruit. So it's a public food forest in Seattle. On Beacon Hill, they have there's a lot of different clientele that use it. It's a really quite a diverse, not only diverse in numbers of fruits and plants, it's also diverse in the numbers of cultures that are involved. It turns out that this part of Seattle, that this zip code in Seattle has more languages spoken in it than anywhere else in the Pacific Northwest. It's something like 40 languages or 50 languages. There's a ton of Africans here, a ton of Asians, and Black people, and you name it. It's a real diverse. So that's interesting. Biodiversity and cultural diversity are really a good mix. Some far-fetched to what people have done in some places to try to. This is greenwashing having bad building design, in a sense. I don't know if I recommend high-rise buildings for the future, but at least they're trying here. A great book if you want to. This would be good for Ojai, and any city should. Somebody in every city in the U.S. should read this book that's in the city planning and see if there's any useful ideas. This is the keyline plan for keyline systems in cities, and that's how to manage water in cities and use runoff and put it into the ground and grow food. And anyway, this is an excellent book. And I'm going to skip that. If anybody wants to whip out their camera, there's our QR code to our to our company. But here's our actual, if anybody wants to look up what I'm doing with herbs, and there, we have a lot of stuff on my Friends of the Trees Botanicals.com website. And if, for instance, if you go to resources, I have 4 YouTube channels with 200 YouTubes on them. And you can go there and you can watch me to your heart's content or until you're sick. But anyway, I have a lot of YouTubes and I have a lot of writings and a lot of links to other places. And Brendan McNamara, who's on the call, runs my Global Earth Repair Foundation website. So that's Global Earth Repair Foundation.org. So there's a lot of information there as well. In fact, it's one of the best information sites in the world for grassroots earth repair activities. I must say, between Brendan and myself and the team, we've done an excellent job there. And there's one of our logos. And look at that. I finished the slideshow, even though I had to skip over a bunch. Phew. So I hope that gave you some ideas for Food Forest and a little bit of some practical information and some ideas. And so what I'd like to do next is get out of here and I'm going to, I guess, save it, I guess. And I'm going to,
You can stop share. That's the red button.
okay, well, I actually want to do another sharing. I'm
Yeah,
going,
you have to go in and out.
I'm going to go to the Biotic pump now.
Okay.
Okay, and so I actually have let me see if that's handy. I need to find that document with the Biotic pump.
Gotta click that little
Power.
don't send or send
Oops.
to make the PowerPoint thingy go away.
Okay. I need to, sorry, it's going to take me just a second to get here. I need to go to my, oops, I need to go to my Finder. PowerPoint, oops, how did I get rid of that? Okay.
It looks like PowerPoint crashed and you have to tell it not to, whether or not you have to click send or don't send.
Okay, I'm going to say
Just click don't send for now. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
that's
relaunch PowerPoint.
Okay, bummer. Okay, so I'm at the Finder and what happened to it? I moved it down here and I need to go to, pull it down. Come on, pull it. It won't, I can't, there we go. I need to search for Biotic, boy, it's Biotic. It's really being slow for some reason. I don't know. Okay, well, hopefully that will, oh, it probably won't do it unless I do this. Okay, now it should give me, come on, Biotic pump. Nope, that's not it. Biotic pump.
You want to
Webinar.
There it goes. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 short films because I'll just give a brief introduction. And probably I'm going to start with the most important one actually. Actually, no, I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to click this. Actually, I can't click it on here. Sorry. I'm going to.
Oh, now we may have another problem because if there's sound on that film, you have to tell the screen share that you want sound.
Ooh, well, maybe
Brendan,
can
can
help
you
me walk me through
tell him
that.
where that is?
Let's go.
Right. So you have to close down the screen share just for now.
Okay.
To restart it.
Stop share. Okay.
Stop share. Yeah. Then you have to re-engage sharing.
And then hit share again.
Well, yeah, hit share. Yeah, hit share again, the green button.
Okay.
And then we have the little window like before, there's a little checkbox that says include sound or enable sound.
Share sound. Okay, I see it.
Yeah,
Share sound.
Make sure that's checked. Yeah.
And then I'll hit share again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And now I'm going to do another window here. Am I in another window? New.
There's another option to optimize for video, but I mean, if
I
it's
was
really
going to
choppy,
I was going to go to Google and just put it in Google here, and it would pull up the YouTube, I think. on my screen, and then hopefully you can watch it. Let's see here. Do the biotic pump. And because I can explain all this, but having an animated film will make it so much easier to grasp. It's one of the most important concepts in the world. Are you seeing this now?
Yep, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna hit. I'm gonna hit play. I don't know if you can make it. Maybe I need to hit full size here.
All around the world, traditional wisdom has it that forests bring the rain. Scientists have scoffed at this notion for a while. Forests grow where there's ample precipitation, but they do not cause that precipitation. It comes because of winds that are governed by geomechanical processes which have nothing to do with where the forests are and aren't. Water does not tend to stay in one spot for very long. Most of it ends up running off into the ocean via rivers. Unless there's some way for the moisture from the ocean to come back inland, all of the land's water would be gone very quickly, as would the forest. According to the geomechanical view, moisture gets transferred inland when water vapor is carried from the ocean by winds. Because some of this water gets lost to precipitation, the deeper inland this air gets, the less moist it becomes. Therefore, deeper inland means less rainfall. If this view is true, we should expect to only see forests near the coasts, and drier, more arid areas the farther inland we go. But this is not what we find. Where there are still natural forests, precipitation does not decrease with distance from the ocean. In fact, it often increases, the greatest amount of rainfall being in the deepest parts of the forest, sometimes thousands of miles from the coast. This is unexpected and difficult to explain with the geomechanical view. What on earth could be attracting so much water to a spot so far from the ocean? And why? While there is more water in the ocean than in forests, forested areas have more water vapor in the air. This is because forests, especially healthy ones, have a lot more surface area for water to evaporate off of. Multiple canopy layers, shrubs, moisture-laden ground are all full of water which transpires or evaporates entering the air. As a result, we find much more water vapor in the forest even when there is less total water. The ample amount of water vapor in the forest rises and condenses into clouds, changing from gas to liquid. This creates a drop in air pressure, which allows even more vapor-filled air to rise. This creates an upward air current, which in turn creates a horizontal current closer to the ground. This sucks in air from higher pressure areas, like the air from over the ocean. This air contains some water vapor, which increases the total amount of water in the forest, leading to more frequent rainfall. Essentially, forests create a giant constant air current that attracts moisture from hundreds of miles away. This is how we find so much water so far from the ocean. The forests bring it in. This process is known as the biotic pump, and it shows how traditional wisdom was right all along. Forests really do bring the rain. So as more forests are clear-cut, the more extreme become the droughts, and the more expansive become the deserts. If we want to thrive on this planet, we need to preserve and regenerate the forests.
Okay, I'm going to hit escape. All right, now that explains a bit about the biotic pump. Now I'm going to close this one down and go to another one, another animation, and I'm going to show you that one. It's pretty short again, 412 to 621 copy. Okay, so I need to go to back to this, do a new, do a Google. I know there's faster ways to do this, but this is just what I know how to do. So here we go.
If it works, it's all we need.
Yeah, so here's a YouTube about the biotic pump that's a part of a long movie. There's actually a whole movie. Ooh, looks like you're going to have to sit through a little.
Big retailers don't want you to have this zoom lens, but there's nothing they can do to stop it. So there's this new super powerful monocular, and it's got the zooming power of a military.
Okay. So anyway, they took that long movie and then they cut out just a part of it. And that's what this is just you can see here, the biotic pump, why forests are so indispensable slice experts. So I hope it's not giving me, here's the play, I guess. And this, I'm going to stop it briefly. what we're going to see here is a woman named Anastasia Makarieva explained the biotic pump. She is the person that actually came up, her and her professor, Dr. Viktor Gorkov, invented the biotic pumps, the biotic pump theory in 2000, and I think I had it written down here somewhere, but I don't. I think it was 2010 or 2000.
Yeah, about that.
Relatively, pardon?
I think it's about that.
Yeah, so it's really it's a pretty recent theory, and it's not accepted around the world. But right at the moment, a lot of more people are studying it, and there's a lot of excitement about it. And it's actually explains the mechanism for cooling the earth quite well that we're going to do. So I'm going to go to just whoops, come on. I'm going to go here and go to 412, and we're going to watch Makarieva explain this herself. She's a Russian scientist, St. Petersburg.
Atmospheric circulation above the Amazon rainforest and asked us to explain it with physics theory. He also told us about the massive flow of water vapor, which, through the transpiration of the rainforest and evaporation from the leaves of trees, enters the air. Green leaves enrich the air with water vapor, which is a unique substance.
As the water vapor molecules rise in the atmosphere, they encounter colder and colder temperatures, and their energy decreases. When they bump into each other, they can no longer separate. They then condense into droplets, occupy much less volume than during their gas phase, and become clouds.
The empty space created after condensation leads to a drop in the pressure of the remaining air in the condensation zone, in the atmospheric column. The vertical redistribution of air over a large area results in a pressure drop in the lower part of the atmosphere. So much so that moist air in nearby areas where the pressure is higher begins to move towards the rainforest.
The biotic pump is the mechanism that causes and controls winds and attracts wet air masses from the ocean to the land. This phenomenon is based on the condensation of the enormous flow of water vapor from the transpiration of the forest.
We came up with a theoretical estimate of the power of this process, and it happened to coincide with the observed power of atmospheric circulation. This means that the biotic pump mechanism plays a big role in the formation of atmospheric movements and might be the cause of the astonishing fact that air from the Atlantic Ocean crosses the equator into the southern hemisphere above the Amazon basin.
The discovery of the biotic pump explains why in the Amazon the winds blow in from the ocean to the forest. They thus manage to cross the equator, feeding the flying rivers. But above all, this discovery sheds light on the major climatic role played by forests on all continents.
It's not just the Amazon, but all large natural forests act as biotic pumps. It's true of the
So I'm going to stop sharing there. Okay, what I wanted to do is show you those two. What I can do also send to Catherine is a list of those links. I have 5 links to 5 of the best movies on the biotic pump theory. And so once you have those, you can watch them all or which ones, but those are the 2 short animations. But there's a lot of information here. And one of the things that they didn't necessarily explain in all these, you have to dig into this a little bit because there's quite a bit to it. But one of the things that happens that a lot of people don't realize, including seems like the climate scientists don't realize this, is that, okay, so this water, some comes off the ocean, falls into the forest, goes back into the air, gets carried inland, rains again, and then transpirates again and then goes further in. So they figure that rain water comes in from the Atlantic Ocean into the Amazon and is recycled 7 times before it hits the Andes and then turns south. So in other words, it's a conveyor belt of rain. We have here in California and the Pacific Northwest the atmospheric rivers, or the pineapple expresses, that come in from off the ocean, and those rainfall columns fall on California and the Pacific Northwest, are transpired by our forests and evaporation, and then go further inland, hopefully, and carry. And in the case of the Northwest, our rainfall actually cycles several times into the eastern Washington, moves around eastern Washington, crosses the Rockies, and then goes into the Great Plains. So a lot of the Great Plains water is recycled water from the Pacific Northwest atmospheric rivers that come in from the ocean. So that's our local example. Any rate, what I was going to say is that whenever it precipitates, when the rain, I mean, she showed you what happens when the gas becomes droplets, become clouds, but when the clouds precipitate, a huge release of energy is given off, because all that, the rain, all that water up there, it took energy to evaporate. It's embodied energy in there. And when it precipitates, at the moment rain falls, there's this big flushes of heat given off, and they're high up in the air, and most of it escapes into space. So the main mechanism for the Earth cooling itself is rainfall, precipitation, and we're reducing clouds and we're reducing rainfall around the world, and we're cutting down our forests and reducing the biotic pump. So this theory explains a lot of why the world is getting hotter and drier, and shows us how we can reverse the system, the situation. So, at any rate, there's a brief peek at the biotic pump. I'm curious. Raise your hand if you knew about the biotic pump before. I'm curious. I see Clint and Mary and Charles Upton, and Brendan would raise his hand if his tiger could. But at any rate, you can also raise it virtually. But at any rate, I see a lot of you don't. So I'm pleased to be able to introduce to you via Catherine that she asked me to do this. So we have, so that we are now actually at an hour into this thing, and we still have a half hour for questions and discussions. Where do we want to go now? So
Michael,
yeah.
There's 2 things I would like to kind of bring forward to make sure that people don't miss. One of the things that you said early on that really struck me was how the man who was doing food forests was making sure that the leaf litter stayed on the floor.
Right.
And that is so critical, because that's part of the life cycle, so that what came out of the earth needs to go back to the earth. And so leaving that leaf litter there really does that. And it's important to understand that process, because when you look at forests and the way forests are managed by the Forest Service, they call that ladder fuel, and they get rid of it. So what they're really doing is starving the forest and making sure that the forest floor dries out, because that leaf litter keeps all the moisture in the soil. So that's a thing to really watch when you hear forest people talking about how they're cleaning up the forest. You really don't want the forest cleaned up. You really want that leaf litter to stay there. And the other thing I want to really emphasize is that none of this will happen unless there is water in the soil. So I have a wonderful graphic somewhere, which I need to find again, but it talks about the billions of water that are in the atmospheric rivers. And there's actually more water in the atmospheric rivers than there is in the Amazon. But where does the water in the Amazon come from? It comes from the soil. So there will be no water in the Amazon if there's no water in the soil. So that part of the bionic pump is so critical. And for me, it's really important because it's something that we humans have some agency over. we can make sure that the rain that falls on the land we have stays on the land we have. And that's one of the real blessings of permaculture. It has a lot of techniques to stop, slow, and sink water. So we act as human beavers because we got rid of all the beavers. But once we understand how the land wants to hold water, how it's naturally designed to do that, then we can use techniques from permaculture and other areas to begin to reinforce that, to keep that water on the land. And that's something every person can do with the land that he has control over, she has control over. So I really encourage you to learn more about that. We will have another webinar next month on the 11th, I believe. And I think Charles is even here to talk about that. And he will be talking about land hydrology a little bit, because it's something that we don't talk about much. And it's a really big piece of keeping the water on the land.
Yeah, yeah. So I understand that Charles Upton is who's with us is taking or has finished taking Zach Weiss's water course.
And I think he worked with Zach for a while.
Okay, great. Zach's a good friend of mine. So Charles, you want to say a little promo for your webinar coming up? You can unmute and say a few things.
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah, I'm really excited. Talk about how we can hold water in the land and really try and focus on projects and a lot of case studies around the world. So a lot of my work, I've been doing this for about 15 years now. So a lot of commercial type sites, gray water retrofits, as well as water retention landscapes. Yeah, so that's a really quick plug, but we're going to be looking all the way from the built environment all the way out into the landscape. So rainwater harvesting on the built environment, how we can hold water there, and then the gray water piece, that connection to the landscape, and then out in the landscape, sort of, more along the lines of Zach's work of doing earthworks and ponds and all these sort of water retention features and the implications there. So, yeah, going to try and keep it really focused on, projects. So lots of pictures and a lot of examples. But yeah, that's my plug.
Great. Well, that sounds
Charles, so
good.
sign up.
Yeah, I want to go. It's the kind of thing I'm really keen on, and yes. So anybody that's doing a food forest should always be considering how what's when it does rain, what happens with the water, how do you hold it more, how do you get the most use out of it, and yeah. So water is always a big consideration. And especially if you're in a dry area like I am or Carl is. Some of us live in some places in the world. I guess you could say this. You could set up a food forest that could subsist on natural rainfall in most places in the world. There are some places that are so extreme it's really difficult, but
Once they're
it
established.
certainly it really helps if you have irrigation when you're in the drier sectors. It gives you a lot more potential of species to use, and also gives you higher yields if you can supplement water. Okay.
So Carl just put a link in the chat, which I will mention to people, because one of the things that we talk a lot about, the two of us, are Village Homes, which is a city in Davis, California. And one of the things about permaculture and food forests is we don't tend to think urban. We tend to think rural when we do these things. And yet you can do this kind of stuff in an urban environment. And we're going to have to, because most of us live in urban environments. So if we don't figure out how to adapt our urban environments to ways that will really support this, we're going to be in trouble. And Village Homes did this 50 years ago and are an incredible example. We have 3 interviews, 3 videos on our website about them. So as members, you get access to all of that. And it really is inspirational to see what a perfect proof of concept it is. They recently had a 500-year rain event of 5 inches of rain in a day, and they had no runoff at all. their food forest, they planted, and Carl can speak to this, instead of doing infrastructure that was concrete pipes, they did green infrastructure, which looked like trees. They spent the money on fruit trees. And now you can get, if you live there as a resident, you can get up to 87% of your food just from the gardens and the fruit and nut trees that grow on the property.
Wow. So how many videos are on your website there, Catherine?
Oh,
Maybe.
I have no idea about the number of videos, but we
Sure.
have at least 3 on Village Homes. We did
Oh,
2.
okay. Well, I'll have to look into this. That
We have a ton
bit
of
more
stuff.
of it. Okay, that's a
Yeah.
great resource then.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brad Lancaster is wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Yeah. He's got a ton of books, by the way. So I really recommend looking at the books that he's put out to give you an idea about how to do that on your own property, because that's really how he works.
Mhm.
Not wanting to be um I don't want to take anything away from Brad Lancaster's work, but his book from 2013 was 40 some years after the Corbett's did this in Davis. So it's Davis, they pretty much did everything. And you can see that it's, how it works after 50 years, including curb cuts to take water from the street. So um my closing remark is, yes, learn from Brad Lancaster, but let's learn lessons so that we don't have to wait 40 years to learn more lessons.
Right.
And I think one of the big differences too is that the Village Homes was designed from the outset to do this. Brad had to work with an already established thing and figure out how to make that work. So it's a slightly different thing. But the vision that they had, the 60 acres that they have, that they use for Village Homes, and the 220 houses, 25 multifamily buildings, and 8 businesses, has no runoff. And it's 15 degrees cooler than the next door development, which isn't.
The rest of it's cooler than the rest of the Sacramento Valley, which is a pretty hot part of California.
Yep.
Mhm.
And Michael, you mentioned rainfall. Davis gets probably 17 inches of rain a year. And I know that until the 4 or 5 year drought from 2016, they didn't use any irrigation. They got enough rain and soaked into the soil deep enough over all those years.
Great,
So
great example then, because 17 inches is not that much, but it's certainly better than some places. I'm in a 15-inch rainfall zone, and I've lived and farmed in 12 and 10-inch rainfall zones, and yeah, and then when you get down to 5 inches, then it's really, or if you're, at any rate, like I say, the less water, it's a bit constraining. However, if you have the best design and if you had, let's put it this way, the smarter you are, the more productive and the better it can be too. So it isn't just a matter of rain and soil and plants. There a little bit of some intelligence and research really helps as well.
And also, if it's dry but there happens to be fog, you might be in luck. There's structures you can put up to catch from fog, and species too that happen to specialize in those areas. You can make belts of those.
The redwoods specialize in that.
Exactly. Yeah. The
Big
forests
trees
are
on fog.
fogged. Are a lot of them. A lot of forests are fog collectors in a sense. I would say at every forest, if it's foggy and there's also hoarfrost, there's dew. It's interesting. I just learned this recently. I've been researching hoarfrost and what's the other one? There's a dew, hoarfrost, and rime ice. Any rate, and fog. All of those forms of water, which aren't typically what we call rain, are called occult water. It's a forms of occult water. And so I thought it was interesting that it's called occult. And so I'm trying to research more of that as well. So that's another topic of interest. Okay, what
If I
else?
could add one last point, because just adding to what Catherine said about the 5 inches of rain that Village Homes got a few years ago, and and we can share some videos of that from a gentleman who lives there. Um, but in addition to it, Catherine said that there was no very little runoff, but also because the soil is so healthy, it absorbed. There was very little flooding or even ponding beyond the ponds or the swells. But also to say, their use of swales is very, I think I'm starting to realize is very different than the way we use swales today, particularly engineers. For us today in development and architects and engineers, swells are to slow the water moving off the site, but the Corbetts, they use their swells to hold the water on the site as long as possible and as much as possible. So it's a very different use of swell.
Mm-hmm.
There was
Um,
also a governance principle, actually, an organizing principle for governance, which
oh
was
yeah.
kind of unique because it's one thing that all of the residents have in charge of. They need to manage the swales in their area, and that's a responsibility that they have to keep those swales functional. So it's a way of getting people to cooperate and collaborate uh, without telling them they have to do it or what they have to do.
Okay, who else out there? Anybody wants to talk about any particular species or fruits or nuts or plants? Uh, that's always a big part of food forestry.
Yeah, and Charles, right, there's some wonderful work that's been done in India at scale, actually. And these are people with shovels, folks. They don't have these big monster machines that Zach likes to use. They just are a bunch of folks out there with shovels, able to totally change their environments by creating water holding mechanisms and then planting correctly. And they've just totally transformed their environment by doing that. So it's something anybody can do. It's not rocket science.
I have a question.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh no, no, it's okay. Actually, you probably could answer this as well.
Uh,
Yeah, so I part of the land that we bought, we bought it from US Forestry. And so they didn't clear the wetland and they didn't clear by the creek, but it was about 5 years ago they cleared. And so now you have like all the, you know, mullein and, all the huckleberry and all that growing. Um, there's a lot of litter on the ground. So where the swells will go, would you just leave the litter down and then like dig your swells kind of around it? Or would you push the litter and then do the swells and wood chip it? I don't know.
Well, well, if you're going to be digging swales and digging, you would want to pull the topsoil and the organic matter off to one side and use it specifically either on the top of the berm or
Mm,
in some way use it to, you don't want to bury it and mix it all up with all the subsoil. So
okay.
you want to get that biomass off first and then the topsoil. Usually keep your soil layers separate and you have
Mm,
different
um,
places you use them. Uh, Another option I could point out to people, maybe not be in your case, but if there's enough, if you can get your hands on rotting wood or any kind of biomass, you can make hugelkulturs, and I highly recommend hugelkulturs for helping hold water in the landscape. On the landscape, you can put hugelkulturs as the berm of the swale. In other words, you can have you actually the berm for the swale can be a hugelkultur if you have the material because you're busy messing around with the soil and moving it around. So it's pretty easy to utilize it for hugelkulturs at that point. So if you don't know about hugel cultures, you know, it's really worth researching. And the best way to learn about it is just HUGEL and then usually KULTURE. But if you just go to YouTube and type in hugelkulturs, and you'll see lots of different examples, different ways of doing it, different scales. So it's really there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of different kinds. Every hugelkultur is kind of unique. I don't think it's hard to standardize them. It depends what you hit, the soils, the material you're starting with. Lots of variation. Yeah. Let's see. So what else?
Yeah,
Oh, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Charles.
Yeah, Charles
Charles
started
was
saying
next.
something earlier.
I was just gonna follow up with Catherine and say that the work in Rajasthan is super impressive, the recent work, but they have been the most densely populated, truly arid desert in the world for, you know, over 1,000 years. So these are very, very old techniques, and they've been very, very successful. And you start looking at that population density per rainfall, it's extraordinary compared to even modern places now. So anyway, just want to put it out that they've been doing it for a long time.
Right. So yeah, if to research the Indian, there's the Zach Weiss has some movies and videos out, but Andrew Millison, permaculturist at Oregon State University, has tons of really good YouTube videos, and he has a lot of work in Africa. I mean, excuse me, India and in Africa, where he's showing what the grassroots people are doing with shovels and picks, and sometimes machinery too, but really grassroots great grassroots movements happening in India and Africa that really give you hope. It's like, oh, maybe we can pull this one out yet, folks. And so I highly recommend Andrew Millison and the Pani Foundation. How anybody remember how to spell that? The Pani, Paani, or I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Pani,
P
Pani, it's India, yeah,
yeah,
water in Hindi.
yeah,
Pani.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, and you can look up Andrew
Yep.
Millison and that that's well
Yeah,
worth
They,
looking
they
at.
published reports actually on the foundation talking about what they're doing. So you can download some of their annual reports and get stories.
Right.
Noah, question?
We're just scratching.
Okay, I'm gonna call it.
I had a question about if it's all right.
Sure, sure.
Inoculation. So we talked about the food forest and we talked about mushrooms that happen in the food forest and medicinal forests. And I wondered, Michael, if you'd heard of if you had any experience with, or you heard of anybody purposely inoculating food forests or medicinal forests with useful medicinal species of mushrooms, and also
Yeah.
related what the mycelium does for the biotic pump and how that relates to all this.
Okay, well that's a bigger
It
one.
might be bigger.
But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of work being done. There's a huge explosion of mycorrhizal people and mycology and grassroots work with it. And Marisha Auerbach is one person I know, permaculturist from Olympia, Washington. Aurbach, Aur. I'm not. I think it's Auerbach. Anyway, Marisha Auerbach has been doing a lot of work on that, inoculating in food forests, and I think it's. I don't. It's not my field, so I couldn't point you to that. But I did remember. I wanted to. Remember, I mentioned earlier that there's certain books out there, and I was going to send you that list. So maybe instead of trying to tell you some more resources, I'll just send it to Catherine. I think that's maybe a bit easier, but maybe I'll just mention a couple actually, just in case you don't get that. But there's a guy in England called Martin Crawford, and he has 3 or 4 books out on food forests. And his books are really good quality. They're especially good he's in England, so they're especially useful in the Pacific Northwest, mild maritime climates. But I'm sure that there's information there for for wider afield. But I really like Martin Crawford's books. And if you there's a David Jackie has the most expensive set of books on food forests. It's called Edible Forest Gardens, and it used to be 150 for the 2-volume set. I think you can get it on sale for 70 or something sometimes. But his is the very technical, the detailed science of food forest. It's not like for the ma and pa food forest person.
Michael, what was the name of the book again?
It's called Edible Forest Gardens. It's a 2-volume set. David Jackie, Jacke. Anyway, it's expensive, but it's one of the best. There's a book also called, and I don't have it in front of me. There's a community food forest book too, a whole book just on setting up community food forests. Noah, you want to comment there? You want to unmute?
agroforestry.co.uk has 2 international food forest symposiums. The first International Food Forest Symposium and the second Food Forest Symposium. They're free to watch these conferences, which have phenomenal, extensive documentaries from people worldwide about advanced food forest explorations in Europe, US, Asia. You can look that website up.
Okay, Food Forest Symposium.
And he put the link in the chat.
Oh, he did. Oh, good. I look
did.
forward to looking at that. Thank you.
I'd also like to mention in terms of fungi, one of the things that isn't mentioned often is that you can get fungi into your compost if you do it right. Now, this is not for the faint heart or for the beginner. It's a little more sophisticated. And our last webinar 2 weeks ago with Nick Tomasini went into that in great detail. So that information is there if you want it. And we'll be bringing back more things like that as we move along. We're starting to get some more resources in that, so to help people be able to do that at home.
Okay. Well, I think that feels like that was a good hour and a half there, or very close to it, and covered quite a bit of ground. And I will look forward to seeing you at some other things that I'm on for, maybe not with Catherine necessarily, but I'm out there and Catherine's out there and Carl, and there's Charles. There's a whole network of people. In fact, there are hundreds and thousands of networks of people doing similar things, and we're just interface with those that you can. And it's always nice to bump into people, over and over again as we go through this.
It is a movement, and it's going to need all of us to do. So I will reiterate again that I think the bionic pump is so important, and we really are looking for people to join us in that movement. So if you want to do that, please do. There are 3 ways that you can support us. You can support us by donating here. If you're into forests, you can help add to the pot of money we're collecting to plant Miyawaki Forest Method forests here in the Spokane area. And we're working on creating 3 scholarships, 2 for soil science and 1 for land hydrology. So if you want to contribute to that effort, you can do that there. So I really appreciate everybody's attendance, good questions, attention. It's just wonderful to be around people who are loving the planet as much as we all do. It's going to take all of us to get us out of this, but I do believe we can do it. We just need to act like beavers. That's all we need to do. So